11-year-old Tyrell Jackson sat at the back of Ms. Winter's fifth-grade classroom, his eyes fixed on the clock. Every tick seemed to drag on forever. Math used to be his favorite subject, but not anymore. Not since he'd been placed in Ms. Winter's class 3 months ago. The classroom walls were covered with colorful posters about fractions and multiplication tables, but they didn't bring Tyrell any joy. He slumped in his chair, trying to make himself invisible as Ms. Winters paced between the desks, handing back yesterday's homework. "Remember, children," she announced with that smile that never quite reached her eyes, "these grades reflect your effort and ability. Some of you clearly worked harder than others." Tyrell's stomach tightened. He had spent 2 hours on that assignment, working through each problem carefully just like his dad had taught him. His father, Dr. Raymond Jackson, was brilliant with numbers. Everyone said so. The school district hadn't hired him as the new superintendent because of his charming personality, though he had that too, but because of his track record turning struggling schools around. But Tyrell hadn't told his dad about the problems in Ms. Winter's class. How could he? His father was so busy with his new job, attending meetings late into the evening, trying to fix a school system that had been broken long before he arrived. The last thing he needed was to worry about Tyrell too. "I know I'm good at math," Tyrell whispered to himself, a mantra he'd been repeating with decreasing conviction over the past few months. Before Ms. Winters, he'd always gotten A's and B's. Now he was barely passing. When the homework landed on his desk, Tyrell held his breath. A red 65% glared up at him, but it was the note scribbled beside it that made his heart drop. Disappointing work. Maybe if you spent less time playing basketball and more time studying, you'd do better. This kind of work confirms what I've always suspected about your people. Tyrell's cheeks burned. He hadn't even tried out for basketball. He was in the chess club. He quickly folded the paper and shoved it deep into his backpack. Did anyone else see? He glanced around, catching the eye of Lily Chen, who sat next to him. She looked away quickly, but not before Tyrell saw the pity in her expression. Great, so others had seen it too. It wasn't the first time Ms. Winters had said something like this. Usually it was quieter. Little comments when she passed his desk about how some students just aren't cut out for academic success, or asking if anyone in his family had actually finished college when he struggled with a problem. Each comment was like a paper cut, small enough to deny, but painful nonetheless. That afternoon, Tyrell dragged his feet walking home from the bus stop. His dad wouldn't be home until late again. The house felt empty and quiet as he let himself in with the key he wore on a string around his neck. He made himself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out before him, but he couldn't focus. The red marks on his math paper seemed to mock him. He used to love solving equations, finding the joy in numbers clicking into place. Now all he felt was dread. Tyrell didn't hear the front door open. He didn't notice his father standing in the kitchen doorway, briefcase still in hand, watching him stare blankly at his homework. "Tough day?" Dr. Jackson asked, setting down his briefcase and loosening his tie. Tyrell jumped. "Dad, you're home early." Budget meeting finished sooner than expected. Dr. Jackson opened the refrigerator, poured himself a glass of water, and sat across from his son. "What are you working on?" "Just math." Tyrell tried to slide the graded paper under his textbook, but he wasn't quick enough. "Can I see?" his father asked, reaching for the homework. Tyrell's stomach churned. He wanted to say no, to hide the evidence of his failure, to spare his dad the knowledge that his son wasn't the math whiz everyone expected the superintendent's kid to be. But something in his father's gentle expression broke down his defenses. Slowly, he pushed the paper across the table and waited for his world to change. Dr. Jackson took the homework paper from Tyrell, his eyes scanning the page. His expression didn't change at first, staying calm and thoughtful like it always did when he was helping with math problems. But then he saw the comment. Tyrell watched his father's face carefully. He saw the exact moment when his dad's eyes found the red words scrawled in the margin. The slight widening of his eyes. The barely noticeable tightening of his jaw. The way he took a slow, deep breath through his nose. "How long has this been happening?" Dr. Jackson asked quietly, still looking at the paper. Tyrell stared at the kitchen table, tracing a wood grain pattern with his finger. I don't know what you mean. His father placed the homework down gently, as if it might break. Tyrell, look at me. He lifted his eyes reluctantly. Has Ms. Winters made other comments like this before? There was something in his father's voice Tyrell rarely heard, a slight tremor beneath the calm. Sometimes, Tyrell admitted, but not always written down. What does she say? Tyrell fidgeted with his pencil. Just little things. Like when I ask questions, she says I'm not applying myself, or that some students just don't have what it takes. One time she asked if anyone had helped me with my homework, because it was surprisingly good. His father was silent for a moment, and Tyrell quickly added, but maybe she didn't mean anything bad by it. Maybe I'm just not that smart at math anymore. Stop right there, Dr. Jackson said firmly. You are incredibly bright, Tyrell. Your brain works in amazing ways. I've seen you solve problems that would challenge kids 3 grades ahead of you. That was before, Tyrell mumbled. Before what? Before Ms. Winters. I used to feel smart in Mr. Griffin's class last year. Now I feel, he struggled for the right word, stupid, like maybe she's right about me. He couldn't bring himself to repeat the phrase your people. Dr. Jackson stood up and walked around the table. He pulled out the chair next to Tyrell and sat down, turning to face his son directly. Listen to me very carefully, he said. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your intelligence. What's happening here is not about your abilities. It's about Ms. Winters' prejudice. What's prejudice? Tyrell asked, though he had a feeling he already knew. It's when someone decides things about you before even knowing you, based on what you look like or where you come from. Dr. Jackson put his hand on Tyrell's shoulder, and it says everything about them and nothing about you. Tyrell felt something loosen in his chest. He'd been carrying around a heavy feeling for months, wondering if maybe he just wasn't as smart as everyone thought, if maybe Ms. Winters could see something in him that others had missed. She doesn't even know you're my dad, Tyrell said suddenly. On parent-teacher night, Mom came alone because you had that big meeting, remember? And she introduces herself with her maiden name at work. A strange expression crossed Dr. Jackson's face. She doesn't know I'm your father? Tyrell shook his head. I don't think so. She's never mentioned it. His father was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he picked up his phone. I'm going to call Principal Rivera and schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. No. Tyrell said quickly, panic rising in his throat. Please don't. It'll just make things worse. How could it possibly be worse than it is now? His father asked gently. The other kids will know. They'll think I'm a snitch, or that I can't handle things myself. Tyrell could already imagine the whispers, the looks. Please, Dad, I can just try harder. Dr. Jackson set his phone down. He looked at Tyrell for a long time, his eyes sad but determined. You haven't done anything wrong, he said firmly. And you shouldn't have to try harder to be treated with respect. That's not how this works. He picked up the homework again. What if Ms. Winters is saying these things to other kids too? Kids whose parents don't know or can't do anything about it. Tyrell hadn't thought of that. He remembered Diego's face last week when Ms. Winters had commented on his English during a math presentation. And Zoe, who had stopped raising her hand after Ms. Winters had made that comment about people from her neighborhood. His father was waiting, giving him time to think. Finally, Tyrell nodded. Okay, but can we not tell everyone you're my dad right away? I want her to have to explain that note without knowing who you are. For the first time that evening, Dr. Jackson smiled. That, he said, is a very good idea. The next morning, Dr. Jackson called the school from his office. This is Raymond Jackson, the district superintendent. I need to schedule an urgent meeting with Principal Rivera and a teacher named Ms. Winters. He could hear the surprise in the secretary's voice. Oh, of course, Dr. Jackson, let me check their schedules. After a moment, she came back on the line. Principal Rivera can meet at 11:30, and Ms. Winters has a planning period then as well. Shall I tell them what this is regarding? Just say it's about a student concern, Dr. Jackson replied, keeping his voice professional. I'll provide details when I arrive. Dr. Jackson hung up and stared at his son's homework, which he placed in a folder. He'd barely slept last night, thinking about what Tyrell had told him. How many other students had received similar comments? How long had this been going on? And how had no one noticed? At 11:25, Dr. Jackson walked through the front doors of Pine Ridge Elementary. He signed in at the front desk, where the receptionist looked startled to see him. "Dr. Jackson, we weren't expecting you for the budget review until next week." "I'm here on a different matter," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Principal Rivera is expecting me." He was led to Principal Rivera's office, where he found a short woman with gray streaked hair sitting behind a desk. She stood quickly when he entered. "Dr. Jackson, what a surprise," she said, extending her hand. "When my secretary said you wanted to meet, I assumed it was about the new literacy program." "I'm afraid not," he replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Is Ms. Winters joining us?" "Yes, she should be here." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door, and Ms. Winters walked in. She was tall with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her clothes were neat and professional. She looked exactly like the kind of teacher parents would trust with their children. "Ms. Winters, thank you for joining us," Principal Rivera said. "This is Dr. Jackson, our new district superintendent." Ms. Winters smiled brightly, extending her hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Jackson. We're all so excited about your plans for the district." Dr. Jackson shook her hand briefly. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Once they were all seated, Principal Rivera folded her hands on her desk. "So, what brings you here today, Dr. Jackson?" Without a word, he opened his folder and placed Tyrell's homework on her desk, turned so both women could see it clearly. "I'd like an explanation for this comment," he said quietly. Principal Rivera leaned forward to read it, her expression changing from confusion to shock. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "That's not relevant right now," Dr. Jackson replied. "What's relevant is that a teacher in your school wrote this on a student's homework." Ms. Winters' face had gone pale. She leaned forward slightly. "I don't understand. How did you come across this? That's a private assessment between me and my student." "Is that what you call it? An assessment?" Dr. Jackson's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Because to me, it looks like blatant discrimination." Ms. Winters straightened in her chair. "With all due respect, Dr. Jackson, you're taking this out of context. Tyrell has been struggling in my class, and sometimes students need firm feedback to motivate them." The room went silent. Principal Rivera looked from Ms. Winters to Dr. Jackson, her eyes widening slightly. "You know my son?" Dr. Jackson asked quietly. Ms. Winters blinked rapidly. "Your son?" "Yes, Tyrell Jackson is my son." The color drained completely from Ms. Winters' face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Principal Rivera was looking at the homework again, her expression grim. "Ms. Winters, this comment is completely inappropriate regardless of who the student's parent is." "I didn't. I never." Ms. Winters stumbled over her words. "I was simply trying to motivate him. Sometimes boys need a firm approach, especially when they're not applying themselves." "When they're not applying themselves," Dr. Jackson repeated slowly, "or when they're black." Ms. Winters flinched. "That's not fair. I would never." "Let me be clear," Dr. Jackson cut in, his voice still measured but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "The phrase 'your people' has a very specific meaning in this context, and we all know it. Now, I want to know if you've made similar comments to other students." "Of course not," Ms. Winters said quickly. "This was an isolated incident. I was having a bad day and I shouldn't have written that. I apologize." Dr. Jackson studied her for a long moment. "My son tells me this isn't isolated, that there have been other comments, other implications. Children often misinterpret." "Ms. Winters," Principal Rivera interrupted, "I think it would be best if you return to your classroom for now. We'll need to continue this discussion later, and I'll need to review your student feedback and grading practices." Ms. Winters stood, straightening her jacket with trembling hands. "Of course," she said stiffly. "Dr. Jackson, I want you to know I'm not what you think I am." As she walked out, Dr. Jackson turned to Principal Rivera. "I want a full investigation," he said quietly, "not just for Tyrell's sake, but for every child in her classroom." Principal Rivera wasted no time. By that afternoon, she had pulled Ms. Winters' grading records for the past 2 years. She spread them across her desk as Dr. Jackson sat across from her, both of them scanning through the papers. I'm seeing a pattern, Principal Rivera said, pushing her reading glasses up on her nose. Look at these grades. She pulled out several class spreadsheets. Her white students average B+ to A. Hispanic students average C+. Black students average C to D+. She looked up at Dr. Jackson every semester, without fail. Dr. Jackson rubbed his forehead. Could it be explained by other factors? Test scores, maybe. I thought of that too. Principal Rivera pulled out another folder. Here are the standardized test scores for the same students. No significant differences across racial groups. In fact, some of her lowest graded students scored highest on standardized tests. Like Tyrell, Dr. Jackson said quietly. Exactly like Tyrell. Principal Rivera looked troubled. He scored in the 94th percentile in math on his state test last year, yet she's giving him Ds. Dr. Jackson leaned back in his chair, taking this in. What about student complaints, parent concerns? Principal Rivera hesitated. There have been a few. Nothing concrete. A parent mentioned their child didn't feel seen in Ms. Winter's class. Another asked why their daughter's grades had dropped so dramatically after being a student for years. And no one connected these dots before. Principal Rivera looked uncomfortable. Ms. Winters has been here for 15 years. She has tenure. She's won teaching awards. When concerns came up, they were handled, individually. Meaning they were dismissed, Dr. Jackson said flatly. Not dismissed, but, she sighed, yes, essentially dismissed. Dr. Jackson stood up and paced the small office. We need to talk to the students, current and former. That's going to cause waves, Principal Rivera warned. The school board, the teachers' union. Let me worry about them, Dr. Jackson said. These are children we're talking about, their education, their self-worth. Principal Rivera nodded, her resolve strengthening. I'll set up interviews for tomorrow. Voluntary, of course, and we'll need parental permission. Good. And I want Ms. Winters on administrative leave until we complete this investigation. She won't go quietly. I don't expect her to. The next day, students began filing into the conference room one by one. Their stories painted a disturbing picture. She always calls on the white kids, even when they don't raise their hands, said a quiet boy named Lewis. When I raise my hand, she says, let's hear from someone who might know the answer. A girl named Aisha twisted her braids nervously as she spoke. One time I got an A on my test, and she asked if someone else had helped me with it. Like I couldn't have done it myself. She told me not to bother applying for the gifted program, said Dian, his voice barely above a whisper. Said it would be a waste of everyone's time. Former students shared similar experiences. I used to love math, said Kira, now in 7th grade. But after a year with Ms. Winters, I started believing I was bad at it. It took my middle school teacher a whole year to convince me I actually had talent for numbers. As the interviews continued, some white parents came forward too. My daughter told me Ms. Winters treated some kids differently, said Mrs. Wilson, her face troubled. I didn't want to believe it. I should have listened better. By the end of the second day, Dr. Jackson and Principal Rivera had spoken with over 30 current and former students and a dozen parents. The evidence was overwhelming. We have more than enough, Dr. Jackson said, closing his notebook. The question is, what do we do now? Principal Rivera looked at the pile of statements on her desk. The right thing, she said firmly, no matter how difficult. That evening, Dr. Jackson drove home slowly, his mind heavy with everything he'd heard. When he pulled into his driveway, he saw Tyrell sitting on the front steps, waiting for him. How was school today? Dr. Jackson asked, sitting down beside his son. Weird, Tyrell said. Ms. Winters wasn't there. We had a substitute. Dr. Jackson nodded. Ms. Winters won't be your teacher anymore. Tyrell looked up, his eyes wide. Because of what I showed you, did I get her fired? No. Dr. Jackson said firmly, putting his arm around Tyrell's shoulders. You didn't do anything wrong. You just told the truth. Ms. Winters is responsible for her own actions. The other kids are talking. Some of them know you're my dad now. Does that bother you? Tyrell thought for a moment. Not really. Diego told me his mom came to the school today to talk about Ms. Winters too. He looked up at his father. Did a lot of kids have problems with her? Dr. Jackson chose his words carefully. Yes, and now those problems are being fixed. Because of me? Tyrell asked quietly. Because you were brave enough to speak up first, Dr. Jackson said, pulling his son close. Sometimes that's all it takes to start making things right. The school board meeting room was packed. Parents, teachers, and even some older students filled every seat. At the front of the room, 7 board members sat behind a long table, their faces serious as they reviewed the documents in front of them. Dr. Jackson sat in the first row, his wife Andrea beside him holding his hand tightly. Tyrell had wanted to come, but they decided this wasn't a place for him. Some things kids shouldn't have to see, even when they're at the center of it all. Principal Rivera sat on Dr. Jackson's other side, her back straight, her expression determined. In the weeks since they'd begun their investigation, she'd become one of the strongest voices calling for change. It had cost her some friendships among the staff, but she didn't seem to regret it. This special session of the Pine Ridge School District Board will now come to order, announced Mrs. Chen, the board chairwoman. We're here to review the findings of an investigation into allegations of discriminatory grading practices and behavior by a teacher at Pine Ridge Elementary. At a table to the right sat Ms. Winters and a man in an expensive suit, her lawyer. She looked smaller somehow, her face tight and pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Before we begin, Mrs. Chen continued, I want to remind everyone that this is not a criminal trial. We're here to determine if district policies have been violated and what action, if any, should be taken. Principal Rivera was called up first. She presented their findings clearly, the pattern in the grades, the statements from students and parents, the written comments found in homework and tests going back 2 years. In my 15 years as an educator, she concluded, I have never seen such a clear pattern of bias affecting student evaluations. Ms. Winters' lawyer stood next. My client has served this district faithfully for 15 years, he said smoothly. She has received excellent evaluations throughout her career. These accusations are based on a misunderstanding and a rush to judgment. When Ms. Winters herself spoke, her voice shook slightly. I have dedicated my life to teaching, she said. I hold all my students to high standards because I believe in their potential. If some students misinterpreted my methods or felt singled out, I deeply regret that. But I categorically deny treating any student differently based on race. A murmur ran through the crowd. A woman 2 rows behind Dr. Jackson whispered loudly, Is she serious? After what she wrote on that poor boy's homework. Next came the parents. One by one, they described how their children had changed in Ms. Winters' class, becoming withdrawn, saying they hated school, crying over homework. Letitia Brown, mother of a girl named Zoe, spoke with quiet dignity. My daughter used to run to the car after school, excited to tell me what she'd learned. After 3 months with Ms. Winters, she would get in silently and stare out the window. When I asked what was wrong, she said, Ms. Winters thinks I'm stupid. No child should ever believe that about themselves. Michael Diaz, father of Diego, stood with his hands gripping the podium. My son was told not to waste everyone's time by applying to the science camp. He had straight A's in science before Ms. Winters. Now he says he's not smart enough for that stuff. That's not education. That's breaking a child's spirit. As each parent spoke, Ms. Winters seemed to shrink further into her chair. Her lawyer whispered to her several times, but she just shook her head. Finally, Dr. Jackson was called to speak. He walked to the podium and took a deep breath. I come before you wearing 2 hats today, he began. As superintendent of this district, I am responsible for ensuring that every child receives equal educational opportunities. And as a father, I am responsible for protecting my son's well-being. He paused, looking directly at the board members. When I saw what Ms. Winters had written on my son's homework, my first reaction was as a father, anger, hurt, a desire to protect my child. But as I spoke with other parents and students, I realized this was about something much bigger than one comment or one child. He placed his hands on the podium, steadying himself. This is about the sacred trust we place in teachers. It's about children who believe what adults tell them about their worth and abilities. It's about a system that allowed this to continue for years because it was easier to look away than to confront an uncomfortable truth. The room was absolutely silent now, every person hanging on his words. My son asked me if he got Ms. Winters fired. I told him no, her own actions did that. What he did was speak truth. And that's what I'm asking this board to do today. Speak truth. Show these children that when adults make mistakes, even serious ones, we take responsibility. Show them that their voices matter. Show them that justice is real. As Dr. Jackson returned to his seat, Ms. Winters stood up suddenly. "May I speak again?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Chen nodded, and Ms. Winters walked slowly to the podium, her lawyer whispering urgently behind her. What she said next would change everything. Ms. Winters stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. Her lawyer was half out of his seat, clearly unhappy with her decision to speak again. She gave him a small shake of her head, and he sat back down, his face tight with worry. The room fell completely silent. Even those who had been whispering among themselves stopped to listen. "I've been sitting here listening to everyone," Ms. Winters began, her voice stronger than before. "Listening to these parents talk about their children, how they changed, how they started to doubt themselves." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I wanted to deny it all, to say these were misunderstandings or exaggerations. But the truth is," she closed her eyes briefly, "the truth is, they're right." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Dr. Jackson leaned forward slightly, his expression guarded. "I didn't start teaching to hurt children," Ms. Winters continued. "I wanted to make a difference, but somewhere along the way, I started believing things I was taught growing up. Things about who could succeed and who couldn't." She looked down at her hands. "I convinced myself I was being realistic, that I was doing these children a favor by not giving them false hope. That's what I told myself when I wrote that comment on Tyrell's homework. When I discouraged Zoe from joining advanced math. When I told Diego not to apply for science camp." Her voice broke slightly. "But listening to their parents today, hearing what I did to those children, I can't hide from it anymore. Not from you, and not from myself." Ms. Winters looked directly at Dr. Jackson. "I'm deeply sorry for what I wrote on your son's homework. And I'm sorry to every student I failed by seeing them through the lens of my own prejudice instead of seeing their potential." She turned to the board members. "I wasn't asked to keep my job. I don't deserve to be in a classroom until I've done a lot of work on myself. All I ask is that you use what happened here to make sure no other teacher does what I did. These children deserve better." With that, she returned to her seat. Her lawyer was scribbling furiously on a notepad, looking frustrated, but she ignored him. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. "Thank you, Ms. Winters. The board will now deliberate in private. We'll return with our decision shortly." As the board members filed out, the room erupted in conversation. Dr. Jackson sat perfectly still, his wife's hand still in his. "What do you think will happen?" Principal Rivera asked quietly. Dr. Jackson shook his head. "I don't know." That wasn't what I expected. 45 minutes later, the board members returned to their seats. The room quickly quieted down. Mrs. Chen spoke clearly into the microphone. "After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, including Ms. Winters' statement, this board has reached a unanimous decision." She looked directly at Ms. Winters. "Your employment with Pine Ridge School District is terminated, effective immediately." There was no reaction from Ms. Winters. She simply nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. However, Mrs. Chen continued, "We acknowledge your years of service and your willingness to take responsibility for your actions. If you complete a comprehensive anti-bias training program and can demonstrate meaningful change, you may apply for a non-teaching position within the district after 1 year." She turned to address the entire room. "This situation has revealed serious gaps in our oversight and evaluation processes. In response, this board is establishing a committee to review our hiring practices, teacher evaluations, and complaint procedures. We are committed to ensuring nothing like this happens again." As the meeting concluded, people began to file out. Ms. Winters walked alone, her lawyer trailing behind her talking on his phone. As she passed Dr. Jackson, she stopped briefly. "I truly am sorry," she said quietly. Dr. Jackson looked at her for a long moment. "Don't tell me," he finally said. "Show those kids by becoming better. That's what I teach my son. It's not about the mistake, it's about what you do after." Ms. Winters nodded once more, then continued walking. On the drive home, Dr. Jackson was unusually quiet. His wife reached over and squeezed his hand. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He smiled slightly. "I'm thinking about what to tell Tyrell. About how sometimes people can surprise you, for worse, but also for better. And sometimes," his wife added, "it takes one brave kid to change an entire school." 3 months later, Tyrell walked into his new classroom with a smile on his face. The walls were covered with colorful posters about famous mathematicians from different backgrounds. A banner across the front of the room read, "Everyone can be a math star." His new teacher, Mr. Powell, greeted him at the door with a high five. "Ready for the math challenge today, Tyrell? I think you might be the first one to solve it." "Definitely," Tyrell said, taking his seat near the front. He no longer tried to make himself invisible. These days he wanted to be seen. After Ms. Winters left, a lot of things changed at Pine Ridge Elementary. The school board created a special committee to review teaching practices, with Dr. Jackson leading the effort. Parents were now invited to regular meetings where they could share concerns. Teachers went through new training on how to recognize and avoid bias in the classroom. But the biggest change was in the kids themselves. Diego, who had been told not to waste everyone's time with science camp, was now building a robot for the district science fair. His project sat in the back of Mr. Powell's classroom, half finished but already impressive. Zoe, who used to stare at her desk and never raise her hand, was now the captain of the school's math team. She helped other students when they got stuck, explaining concepts clearly and patiently. And Tyrell? He was back to being himself, curious, confident, and excited about learning. His grades reflected his true abilities now, and he'd been invited to join the gifted program starting next fall. After school that day, Tyrell found his dad waiting in the car. "How was school?" Dr. Jackson asked as Tyrell climbed into the passenger seat. "Good," Tyrell said, buckling his seatbelt. "Mr. Powell says I'm ready for some 8th grade math concepts." Dr. Jackson smiled. "That doesn't surprise me at all." As they drove, Tyrell noticed they weren't heading home. "Where are we going?" "I thought we'd stop by the community center. There's something I want to show you." When they arrived, Dr. Jackson led Tyrell to a large classroom. Inside, about 20 adults sat in chairs arranged in a circle. Some were teachers Tyrell recognized from school. Others were strangers. And there, sitting quietly with a notebook in her lap, was Ms. Winters. Tyrell froze in the doorway. "Dad?" Dr. Jackson put his hand on Tyrell's shoulder. "It's okay, we're just observing." They slipped into seats at the back of the room as a woman at the front continued speaking. "The first step in addressing bias is recognizing it in ourselves," she was saying. "We all have blind spots. The question is, are we willing to look at them honestly?" Tyrell whispered to his dad, "What is this?" "It's the training program the school board required," Dr. Jackson explained quietly. "Ms. Winters asked if I would check in occasionally to see how she's doing. This is the first time I've come." Tyrell watched as Ms. Winters raised her hand to speak. She looked different, less rigid somehow, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of in that tight bun. "I spent years thinking I was treating all students fairly," she said to the group. "But I was measuring everyone against standards that weren't fair to begin with. It took a brave student to show me that." She hadn't noticed Tyrell and his dad at the back of the room. She was just speaking her truth. After the session ended, people gathered their things to leave. That's when Ms. Winters spotted them. She hesitated, then walked over slowly. "Dr. Jackson," she said with a nod. Then, with visible emotion, "Hello, Tyrell." "Hi," Tyrell said, surprisingly not afraid. "I'm learning a lot," she told them, gesturing to the room. "Things I should have known years ago." Dr. Jackson nodded. "I'm glad to hear it. I'm working at the public library now," she continued. "In the children's section. I'm trying to make sure every child finds books where they can see themselves as heroes." She paused. "It's not teaching, but it's a start." As they walked back to the car, Tyrell was quiet, thinking. "You okay?" his dad asked. Tyrell nodded. "Yeah, I just didn't expect to ever see her again." "People can change, Tyrell. Not everyone does, but some really try." "Do you think she's changing?" Tyrell asked. Dr. Jackson put his arm around his son's shoulders. I think she's trying. And that's where all change begins. On the bulletin board outside his office at the district headquarters, Dr. Jackson had hung a simple quote, "Courage is the first step to creating change." Under it, in smaller letters, "Inspired by my son."